Yeah, 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 yeah. Oh, yeah, my. Okay. Good evening, everybody. Welcome aboard. Let's jump right in because it is a very special evening. It's also a very auspicious week. As always, the Parasha gives us tremendous koiches to be able to navigate what life throws at us at every stage of the game. And in particular tonight, which is a very special evening. It's the yahrzeit, the first yahrzeit that is, of the late Rabbi Sachs, Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs of the Shalom, the Shabbat Lichte Gneden, should be a good to better. And his neshama should have an aliyah to aliyah l'guf gashmi, and all the different aliyahs that we speak about. Most importantly, we daven that he should remember, and he should daven on our behalf, and there should be this galus, the goal to take from miyad. So many different messages that he carried to the wider public. The Rebbe's messages, the messages of Chassidus, the messages of Yiddishkeit, in which he made so available in such an eloquent way. And of course, the difference, the impact he had on British Jewry, world Jewry, and people, human beings around is enormous. So it's a special time. Tonight. It's also tonight is the beginning of Chof Mar Cheshvan, which is the birthday of the Rebbe Rashab, the founder of Tomchei Temimim. And Chof Cheshvan is a very special time. Chof Cheshvan is the birthday of the Rebbe Rashab, who even in his very young years, even as a young child, it was clear and noticeable what a special neshama, what a special yid he was. And growing up, everyone could see it happening in front of their eyes. One of the favorite stories I remember hearing and reading was the story when the Rebbe Rashab was playing Rebbe and Chassid. Growing up in a house of their father was a Rebbe, so he and his brother, the Razah, would spend time playing as kids do. And what sort of games did they role play? Not fire engines, because they didn't have fire engines back in the day, but they role played the Rebbe and Chassid. So his older brother, the Razah, became Rebbe, and he played Chassid, and he came to ask the serious concern, which actually was a true story, in which he had not known, where the Alter Rebbe writes that although in theory one could eat nuts on Shabbos, there's nothing to stop someone from eating nuts, but cracking open nuts that are uncorrect runs the risk, which is very common, that one would come to do virus selecting. What does that mean? If you have in a mixture of food and psoiles, food that is not the shells or the rubbish amongst the food, selecting the part that you do not want, you want to throw away, is problematic on Shabbos. And therefore, one should refrain from eating nuts and cracking them open on Shabbos in such a way, unless they were cracked from before Shabbos. Why? Because the shells will get mixed into the mixture and create in a situation where it's common and it's normal to remove the shells in order to be able to eat the nuts, which is forbidden on Shabbos. And the Rebbe Rashab turns to his brother, who's now playing Rebbe, asking for a tikkun for the terrible thing that he had done. He had eaten nuts he cracked nuts on Shabbos. And the Alter Rebbe says it's better not to. He hadn't done anything wrong, but he had done what the Alter Rebbe said it's better not to. And his brother gives him a tikkun, tells him what to do, how he should do teshuvah, and he says to his brother, you're not going to make a Rebbe. You're not a Rebbe. You're not a Rebbe. Why? Because you gave me advice without saying and empathizing with my situation, with my hardship, before you went about dishing out advice. And this, already from a very young age, the Rebbe Rashab understood what it takes to make a yitik, and how to engage the masses in the crowds. So this is an interesting idea of the Chof Mar Cheshvan. We celebrate the birth of the Rebbe Rashab, who gave us, in today's day and age, Tomchei Temimim, a connection and a relationship with Chassidus in a way that we learn it so that it changes our life, that it can affect us, which is what we're doing right now. We're learning a take on the Parasha from what Chassidus teaches us, but not just a concept in Chassidus, but it's Chassidus applied, Chassidus that works, which takes all the mysticism amongst the Torah and puts it in such a way that it actually is workable. It's made to work for us. So this is Chof Mar Cheshvan that's happening tonight. It also happens to be that this Shabbos will be Shabbos Mevarchim Chodesh Kislev, which makes it a very special Shabbos, because Chodesh Kislev happens to be of all Chodoshim, a very Hasidic month. It's the month of Hanukkah, the month of lights. So it's just over a month away now, Hanukkah. Important to remind people that it comes in November. People are usually waiting for the end of December time. Important to remind people that it comes early this year. But in addition to that, also we have that it's the Yomim Tovim of Chodesh Kislev are full, starting with Rosh Chodesh Kislev, it's a Chassidish Yom Tov, and Tes and Yud Kislev, and Yud Dalet Kislev, and Yud Tes Kislev, and Chav Kislev. There's loads of highlights on the Chassidish calendar, which we'll talk about as we go into each one. But it's suffice it to say that this Shabbos Mevarchim is a very lebediga Shabbos Mevarchim, especially that also Shabbos Mevarchim Kislev, besides for being the bracha that is brought for the whole month, is also the time in which we bench, and we not just bench, we gather together as shluchim. The Rebbe shluchim from around the world gather for the conference of shluchim, the international conference, the Kinnus HaShluchim, which takes place in 770 in Crown Heights, in the Rebbe's Shuna. And for those who can't make it, join online these days, the COVID invention, in which we can partake in it, even for those who can't travel, somewhat in person, at least virtually. And it's a big deal. It's a big deal because the Rebbe encouraged people to come. And Ishis Re'eu Ya'azoru, one shliach helps another shliach, inspires another shliach, shares ideas, shares ways and concepts, innovations, and it creates more goodness for the entire world. When you have 4,000 shluchim sitting together in a room, or even a fraction of that, whichever it may be this year, you're not just having 4,000 influential Jews, it's 4,000 communities sitting together and for bringing Mashiach in the here and now. So this is the week we're in right now. Shabbos Parshas Chayei Sarah was often the Parasha in which the Sicha, and especially in the later years when there was a king, it revolved around this idea of shlichus. It happens to be that we'll read in the Parasha that actually the first shlichus that we have in the Torah is learned in this week's Parasha of Eliezer. But let's do the Parasha from the beginning. The Parasha starts off Chayei Sarah, where last week's Parasha finished. Last week finished off with the Akedah. Yitzchak, who at the time was 37 and a bit years old, offered himself up as a carbon. His father offered him as a carbon. In the last second, Hashem told him, no, come off the Mizbeach. And this week's Parasha opens up that after that story, Sarah passed away. Sarah lived for 127 years. She was 90 years old when she gave birth to Yitzchak. She passed away right after the Akedah, and therefore when she was 127 years old, her son would be 37 years old. And that's the opening of this week's Parasha. Avraham is looking for a burial plot to bury his wife Sarah, and he ends up going to find Ma'aras HaMachpelah. He buys it off Ephron Achiti, makes a big deal out of it. First, the guy Ephron wanted to give it away for free. Avraham insisted on paying whatever amount Ephron asked for. And when Ephron opened his mouth and he started claiming money, he took an enormous sum, 400 shkalim over la seicher, golden silver coins, and Abraham, didn't bargain, didn't haggle. This is what you want, you got it, you have it, and it's a deal. And everybody saw that Abraham Avinu was buying the plot of land for Sarah, and that's exactly what happened. Parasha continues that we have Eliezer goes to find, after this story, Eliezer goes to find a wife for his master's son. Avram, after his wife passed away, and after he realized how close he was to losing his son Yitzchak, and he hadn't even had a child, he realized it was time to move on, and he had to quickly go and find a wife and get his son married so they can have children. So he takes his right-hand man, his trusted slave, servant Eliezer, who trusts him with everything, and he says to him, I'm giving over to you a shtar, a document, the deeds of my entire estate. Everything I have, I'm investing into this shidduch that you are now going to find a wife for Yitzchak. Everything that I own is worth investing into, whatever it takes to find the right match for my son Yitzchak. This is the future. This is the next generation. This is what's going to keep the flame burning. And of course, we know the story. Eliezer had a daughter, and he says to Avram, why should I travel miles and miles away? Retrace all the steps that you traveled when Hashem said to you, Lech lecha mi'artzecha, and even further back from that, all the way you left from before. Padan Aram, just to find a girl. My daughter, I brought her up in your teachings. We've been in your house, in your environment, and we're soaked into it. Is she not a good enough match? And Avram says, no, I cannot take your daughter. I want you to go back to my family. And if you can't find anything there, we'll have to deal with it. But my son cannot leave Eretz Yisrael. However, I must have a wife for him from the family, from the unit that Hashem has selected us from. And Eliezer makes the long journey, and it's recorded in great detail in the Parasha, where he travels all the camels, and he finally gets there, and it's Kitzis and it comes very quickly. And he gets to the well, and he meets Rivka coming to fill up the water, and he recognizes she's a very special person. Does the whole prayer, the whole tefillah, to find that Hashem should help him find the right girl right away. Sure enough, she's there, and she offers with great kindness. He's not only going to water himself, give him to drink, he give all the camels, which is a lot of water. And he notices that the water rises towards her, and right away he gives her the gifts, and then he asks her where she's from, what's her name, and yes, bingo, it's exactly what he's looking for. Hashem answers his tefillahs immediately. Goes home, and he tried the negotiations to be able to get her, to be able to leave her hometown and come all the way back to Eretz Canaan, Eretz Yisrael, where she's going to meet Yitzchak and marry him. And it's not so simple. Suel and Lavan, the father and the brother, are trying to do a deal and trying to delay it until Rivka is asked, and she said, look, whether you like it or not, I'm going back with Eliezer. The very next morning, they pack up and they're going to head right back. And after an uneventful night, and Eliezer brings Rivka back. Amazingly, he's like the first shidduch. So Rivka, they come back together, and she sees her husband to be, as she's traveling in, she covers herself with a veil with a great dignity, and he takes her into her home. And as the Parasha says, finally, when he brings her into his tent, and the new miracles that he was used to seeing in his mother Sarah's tent, all of a sudden came back. The three special nisim, the nes of the cloud, the presence of Shechina on the tent, the miracle of the lights that Sarah would light from Shabbos to Shabbos would burn a whole week, and the freshness of her dough, the bread that she made stayed fresh the entire week. These miracles all of a sudden came back with his wife Rivka, and this finally brought him comfort for the loss of his mother. The end of the Parasha, after Yitzchak is married off, Avraham goes and remarries. He goes and marries Keturah, which Rashi tells us right away is another code name for Hagar. If you remember last week, Hagar was sent away with Ishmael after he was being a bad influence for their son Yitzchak. Sarah insisted, and Avraham wasn't sure, so Hashem backed her up and said to her, and encouraged Sarah, the Torah Avraham to listen to Sarah and send his wife away, and Hagar had gone back to Mitzrayim. Now, Avraham takes her back, and the Parasha describes as they have 6 more sons. At the end of the Parasha, Avraham is buried by his wife, his 2 elder children, Yishmael and Yitzchak. Yishmael had done Teshuvah, and Yitzchak, who was Yitzchak, Yitzchak was be his final heir. He inherits everything. And Avraham, during his lifetime, sends away his other 7 children, Yishmael, and the 6 children from Keturah, and sends them away and leaves Yitzchak to inherit him. That's the Parasha in a nutshell. You can imagine these 3 major stories: the story of the Ma'aris and Machpelah, the buying of the cave Machpelah in Hebron, where Avraham Avinu buries Sarah, which is one big story. The second big story, which is the story of the first shidduch in history, Yitzchak marrying Rivka. And the third story, which is Avraham remarrying and taking children to the end of the Parasha. These 3 stories, each one of them has tremendous amount of medrash. All the stories in Parashas do But in particular, this case has some very important lessons. Last week, we spoke about the importance of chinuch. And this week, we're talking about the same theme in which Yitzchak is being set up, not just as a child, but as he's being brought into marriage and becoming the next generation. How much Avraham is willing to go and give up, or not give up, but give into the investment for bringing this marriage into fruition. How much of his wealth, how much of his energy is invested into this, and how many psukim the Torah uses to describe this important event teaches us so much, and how much we should be investing into our own children and into our own family. So this being the case, we now have a lot of chaymer, a lot of content to work with. I do want to say before we get started, I've heard oftentimes people think of the concept of having a shidduch, which is probably a halachic requirement. It's a dignified way to go dignified about it. What is the shadchan's job? So often a shadchan is misunderstood to be somebody, the matchmaker pulls two random people out of the hat, or not out of a hat, makes a calculation, and decides that so-and-so should marry so-and-so. And as long as there's no objections, ahead they go. Of course, a shadchan is a matchmaker, but a matchmaker means an introducer. He thinks of a good, or she thinks of a good idea and introduces him to her and her to him. Doesn't make the decision for anybody, doesn't close anything. Instead, the matchmaker, the shadchan's job is to introduce so-and-so to so-and-so. Perhaps one of the reasons why this mistake, the myth comes about is from this week's Parasha, where Eliezer actually isn't a shadchan. Eliezer's role is much more than just introducing Rivka to Yitzchak and Yitzchak to Rivka. In this particular case, Eliezer's job is much more like a shliach, an agent, acting on behalf of Avraham and Yitzchak, and already giving the ring, so to speak. Back already then, before he brings her home, he's already doing the deal, acting as an agent. It shows us how much trust Avraham Avinu had in Eliezer, but it also teaches us a little bit about what it means to be a shliach, what it means to be an agent, an emissary, on behalf of whoever we're here to represent. So Eliezer was much more than a shadchan, and Eliezer was acting as a shliach, and that's why we understand how Avraham Avinu handed over to Eliezer, who was entrusting with this important shlichus, agency, this important job, mission of marrying off Yitzchak. He entrusted him with every penny that he had. His entire estate was given over in the hands of Eliezer. But let's focus today on a slightly different issue, and this is the issue of losing. The title is Losing Your Audience and Feel Good About It. Sometimes it's best to shrink your audience to amplify your message. I do want to say that it's appropriate right now to mention about amplifying a message. You have, of course, we can mention Rabbi Sachs, Allah Shalom, but also more importantly there, Rabbi Rashab was like the amount of teachings that he taught in a systematic way, Mamorim that built up and were designed for a very particular crowd, but are understood in such an understandable way. This crowd went on to intake this message so well. So although it wasn't a message that was written in English or necessarily a couch read with sound bites, the Tafrei Samach Vav, the Hemshech, is something you got to work hard on. Ayin base, you can imagine these Hamshechim, or something you got to, it's hard going. We got to concentrate. But they're built in such a beautiful way. And those who learn these Mamarim, the Tamimim, of Tamimchei Tamimim, were in perhaps a slightly smaller crowd, but the message that they walked away with, the power that he empowered them with was so powerful, world-changing. And unfortunately, we saw almost immediately how important it was right after the lifetime of the Rebbe Rashab, as the communist regime rose. It was these Tamimim that were the forefront of keeping the fight for Yiddishkeit, the insistence on not giving in, the perseverance, was this chinuch of being connected to and Hashem in a way of a message that was true, values that were not diluted, even if it meant it was for a smaller and more focused audience. What we're going to try and do is do the same thing on ourselves, try and figure out how this message applies to us. Here's the question. We're going to ask, does the average person prefer to be part of the crowd, accepted within the clan, or do people prefer to stand out? Popular versus authentic, unique. And sometimes we prefer both and we don't know ourselves which one we want. Do we prefer to be stand out? Prefer to be included with everything else? And of course, it's not just a question of what's more comfortable. It's a question of what's more important. Is it more important so that make sure that the masses hear what I have to say? Or is it also about not just making sure that the masses hear what they say, but to make sure that the message I carry is as true as can be? And this is the question of whether I want to stand out or want to be accepted, popular, so that many people hear what I have to say and I can share the influence of more and more people, or sticking true to what the core of what I have to say. Now, the truth is you find this not just when the Rav's at the pulpit, where you're deciding what to talk about or not to talk about. If you're building a company and you start off a shop, or you have some sort of product, maybe perhaps you're providing a service to people, and you have a certain level which people begin to appreciate, and you develop a core of ardent followers that appreciate your style, your truth, your message, and then it's gaining momentum. And as you look around, I've got to ask myself, I need to grow this circle of influence because this is a fantastic product. And that becomes a very fine balance between, in order to make it more available, being less specific, less exclusive in order to be inclusive, less unique in order to provide for the masses, but then obviously you run the risk of losing what you stand out for. So being able to be even a politician at the beginning has a whole followership. In order to gain momentum, they need a shift from being small school to becoming big school. And that shift has to be somehow, without losing what they stand for, or at least too much, they have to be able to cater to a wider crowd. And what we're going to learn today is that actually the Yiddishkeit approach is, of course, we have a message for everybody. Yiddishkeit is the word of Hashem. Torah teaches us what everybody needs to know. Yet at the same time, what we teach, what we stand for, what we stand up with, doesn't always cater to everybody. And there has to be an inner circle in which we focus on and build up that inner circle, and we shrink our crowd, so to speak. We lose the audience in a way, or at least part of the audience, but the advantage is there because it brings the message home. And this is what we want to learn. Fascinatingly, in this week's Sikha, we're going to learn how Avraham and Sarah, actually we're going to contrast Avraham and Sarah and pick up this message that although Avraham was the powerhouse of bringing Eibishter to the world, to the masses, bringing God into the rank and file, that everybody should be able to connect. It was the gift of Sarah that until this very day is what keeps Yiddishkeit going. The Yiddishkeit is still here. And Sarah's gift was the ability to filter and to funnel Avram's goodness, weeding out the bad apples, weeding out the distractions, and keeping it straight and narrow, which is what kept Yiddishkeit the powerful message it is till today. And of course, the lesson is that although we like to be heard, we like everybody to do the right thing. As we say, Yiddishkeit has a message for everyone. Nonetheless, we build up from within and a smaller circle, and we treasure the closer circle, because we know when that is strong, it will overflow in the right way without diluting. And this is going to be something that I hope, as we learn through the Sikha, is going to become clearer what we're saying, and we'll be able to apply it into our regular day-to-day life. And as we get ready for Geula, if we get ourselves ready to live Geula, this rule will empower us to be able to continue doing exactly that. So the first quote that we have here is a quote from the Rebbe talking about why it's important to notice little details, every detail in the Torah, including where the Rebbe says here in the Sikha, the name of the Parshah. The name of the Parshah has been around for maybe 1,000 years. So it's definitely got its roots deep in Yiddishkeit. And therefore, when we look at the name of the Parashah, we look at it also as a lesson. And when we look at the name of this week's Parashah, which is Chayei Sarah, we ask the question, the life of Sarah, you'd imagine, what is a Parashah whose name is the life of Sarah? Chayei Sarah, you'd imagine it's all about the life of Sarah, the lifetime of Sarah. What's the lifetime of Sarah? What she did throughout her life. That would be the primary subject. However, and this becomes the question, as we look through the Parashah, in the very first opening psukim, Sarah passes away, and the entire Parashah talks about everything else but her life. There are a number of sikhas that never addressed this issue, and this particular sikha, amazing how the questions are built up, and the answer is so gorgeous, so powerful. So let's do it. Let's learn how we're going to navigate looking at what seems to be a name of a parsha. We're not going to say mismatched. We're going to say that the name of the parsha doesn't seem to line up with what's going on. Why not? So let's look inside. The parsha, as we said, is broken down into three major stories. The very opening pasuk starts with saying, "By you, Chayei Sarah, the life of Sarah was 120 years, 100 years, 20 years and 7 years. These were the years of life of Sarah, and Sarah died in Kiryas Arba, which is Hebron, and then Canaan. Avram came to eulogize Sarah and to bewail her." What's the continuation? Avram goes and he finds a place, a burial plot to bury Sarah. And this is what he does. He goes to Hebron, to Ben Tzochar, and he buys a plot of land, and he weighs up the money, and he's going to bury his wife. And that's Pasuk Yotes. And after Avram buried Sarah's wife in the cave of the field of Machpelah, facing man, which is Hebron in the land of Canaan. So Sarah Imenu is buried. In other words, he's finding closure for Sarah's life. Doesn't sound much like it's Sarah's life. It seems like the opposite of her life. She's passed away, and Avram's finding closure of the passing of his dear wife. Not retaining the memory, burying her. I guess he leaves the stone and moves on. The second large story, which is the bulk of the Parashah, written in great detail, as we said earlier, is the story of him marrying off his dear son, their dear son, Yitzchak. And Yitzchak, the whole story where the servant Eliezer goes all the way, travels, and brings Rivka back, and finally she comes back. And what happens when Rivka meets Yitzchak, and Yitzchak meets Rivka, Pasuk Samach Daled, 64, and Rebecca lifts her eyes and saw Yitzchak, and she let herself down from the camel, and she said to the servant, "Who's this man walking the field towards us?" And the servant says, "He is my master." She took the veil and covered herself. And the servant told Yitzchak all the things that he had done. Pasuk Samach Zayin, this is what we're looking for, right over here. Yitzchak brought her into the tent of Sarah, his mother. He took Rivka and she became his wife. He loved her, and Yitzchak was comforted for the loss of his mother. Yitzchak moves on. Doesn't very much sound like Sarah's life. It sounds like Yitzchak's moving on. It's left behind. It was what it was. And now he's found comfort in his wife from the next stage of history as the world runs. So our second story doesn't talk much about the life of Sarah. And the third story, this is the hardest one. What was the third story? Where Avram, after his wife Sarah passes on, goes, Vayosef Abraham, Vayikach Ish Shema Keturah. Avram goes and takes another wife, Keturah. And as we said, Rashi tells us right away, who was Keturah? Keturah was Hagar. And she goes to have more sons, 6 more sons. And Avram gave all he had to Yitzchak, and to the sons of Avram concubines. Avram gave gifts and sent them away from his son Yitzchak. the whole continuation after Sarah's life. What's even more hard, I mean, obviously, when he takes another wife, it's certainly moving on. But in particular, the wife that he takes, according to Rashi, is Keturah, is Hagar, is the very wife that was sent away on the request of Sarah. And now Avram's gone and remarried her. It really doesn't seem like, and this is the question, it really doesn't seem like we're talking about Sarah's life. It seems like we're moving on. In fact, it looks like we're talking about everything after her life as life continues without her. So here's our question. If the name of the Parasha is Torah, Chayei, Sarah, what are we going to learn from the name of the Parasha? Now, I'll be honest, the lesson we're going to learn from the name of the Parasha is not going to be so much the lesson that we're looking for today. It's one of the lessons. The name what we're going to learn from the name of the Parasha is to take a better look at the Parasha. Go back and take a better look. Well, at surface level, we just learned 3 major stories seem to ignore her life. The name of the Parasha tells us this is Chayei Sarah. That's this week's Parasha. Call it whatever you want. Torah calls this Parasha the life of Sarah. Come back, have a second look. And if you don't get it in the second look, have a third look. Look deep. And this is what we're going to do now. We're going to revisit those stories. So, these are the texts that we have here. That we kind of went through them. Let's do the way it's in the Sikha. The name of the Parasha is puzzling. The entire portion speaks of events that did not occur in Chayei Sarah during her lifetime. On the contrary, every occurrence in the portion happened after Sarah's death. And not only did they happen in the time following her passing, the content of these events represent the opposite of Sarah's life. And this is our question. On the one hand, why is it called Chayei Sarah? And on the other hand, what's the Parasha telling us about the lifetime of Sarah? What is the Parasha all about? Let's have a second revisit the Parasha. Okay, by answering the second question, we'll understand the answer to the first question. Once we know what the Parasha is really telling us, we change question marks into answers. What is the message of this Parasha? We'll better understand why it's called Chayei Sarah as well. That's our mission for today. So what is the theme of this week's Parasha? And the answer is Chayei. Chayei means life. Now, of course, life, we know the difference between someone who's alive and unfortunately someone who's no longer alive. But of course, we know that the body isn't the sum total of life. When a person says, I love you, they don't necessarily, and hopefully they don't mean just the looks or the height, the appearance, the motions, the mannerisms. Hopefully the person says, I love you, I love everything about you, which means the body and soul together, the life of the person. And of course, Chassidus makes a big deal out of this, that a person's life isn't just for 70, 80, 120, 180 years that a person lives in this world. Life lives on. And life doesn't end. The body may stop being alive, but the life of the person remains forever. Because the person is much more than just the body or the time it's spent here. And therefore, Chayei Sarah, the life of Sarah, isn't just what she ate for breakfast, lunch, and supper for 127 years, or which clothing she wore or didn't wear, or where she lived, in which house, or which tent, or what she was cooking. It's much more than that. The life of Sarah is what she lived for. What she lived for, we find in this particular instance in the life of Sarah, is highlighted after her passing, even more so than during her lifetime, which actually makes sense. Because during her lifetime, it was easy to miss what she lived for by what she was doing while she was alive. So again, what I do whilst I'm alive isn't what I'm living for, it's what I'm doing in order for something. And after her passing, it was clear what she lived for, so clear that you could see even in her family, in the difference that she made, what she lived for was being expressed so greatly. And in this week's Parasha, we find Chayei Sarah, not the lifetime of Sarah, but the life mission of Sarah in this week's Parasha, Chayei Sarah. So let's revisit the Parasha And before we do that, we're going to outline what it is that we're expecting to find in this week's Parshah's in-depth analysis, which will also be the lesson we're hoping to learn from Sarah and apply to our own life so that we can be Sarah's children as we learn Parshah's Chayei Sarah. So the way the Parashah does it is, or the way we're going to do it, is that we're going to look into the Parashah to see the contrast between Sarah and Avraham. Not because Avraham wasn't righteous, Avraham is Avraham Avinu. But we're going to contrast the Sarah input into what's created and creating of Klal Yisrael, the future of Hashem's people. And we're going to see the difference between Avraham and Sarah. So generally speaking, we spoke about this last week. Avraham was very into loving kindness, ish chesed, ish ha-chesed, givingness. And givingness knows no boundaries. Certainly when Avraham's in the driver's seat. Anyone and everyone. And this is some of the text that we have here. We're going to miss these two texts. So there's a beautiful picture here. The story in this Torah portion portrays carrying on Sarah's purpose, thereby demonstrating how she truly lived. Okay, that's what we're out to do. We're out to see how this bridge that Sarah and Menu lived for us is actually highlighted in this week's Parashah. It might not be during her lifetime that we see it so clearly, but after her lifetime, we see her life mission. Let's do some text. Let's talk about Avraham in contrast to Sarah, and we're going to highlight in the name Avraham, Hashem calls him, your name shall not only be called Avram, your name should be Avraham. Why is the changed name? For I have made you the father of the multitude of nations. Says Rashi, Av Hamoin Goyim. Until now, you were the father of your local town, city, circle of influence of Avraham. But now you are the father of all of humanity, the whole world. And Avraham took this job seriously. Whoever, wherever, however, anyone that was willing to listen became the next candidate for Avraham Avinu's campaign. And nobody was thrown out. Everybody was welcomed in. And with open arms, and he taught and spent time and energy. He spread the message to everyone who was listening. That's the idea of an Eshel. What was the Eshel? He set up a shop, and anybody who came, didn't only say about Hashem himself, he influenced anyone and everyone who would listen to come and join the cry. So Avraham Avinu, who spent his entire time teaching everyone, was the first universalist. He was the guy who had an influence in even total strangers. Everybody goes. Everybody comes. Everybody's invited. And this Avraham Avinu was tremendous at. And if you think of Avraham in those terms, spoke about this last week as well, as in contrast to Yitzchak, and a big part of what made Yitzchak into Yitzchak was the filter, and perhaps you could say the funnel that Sarah created, and a very different ingredient and add into Avram's approach. Sarah Imenu, Sarah's approach was particularism, selective, but selective in a way that brought all the koiches that were being invested and amplified it within the narrower community. Throwing out flowers and everyone to everyone, compared to a very specific, particular, unique, select, one focused goal. This was Sarah's angle. Where do we see this in Sarah? So, of course, we know from previous parashas, which we'll talk about soon, but we have where she encouraged Avraham, insisted that Avraham send away bad influences for us and Yitzchak. And there were a number of other examples, but right now I want to start off with the way the Sikha does. Fascinating piece of Gemara. The Gemara describes one of these Agadita Gemara stories that took place that carry enormous depth and meaning. And it's a Gemara that describes Rabbanah. Rabbanah was a Tana from the Mishnaic times, and he made his life mission, amongst other things, to go and help out establishing clarity for Koyanim. Not only Koyanim were important for them, but also for anybody who wanted to go into the Beis Hamikdash, should they want to go, but particularly Koyanim, who always have a mitzvah to remain pure, holy, tahor, and therefore we were not allowed to go anywhere near a Beis Chayei, a cemetery, or over a grave, or come in contact with a dead body. What would they do if they don't know exactly where a dead body is? So they would have to find out where the grave sites are so that they could go around a marked off place. Your Banal made it his business to travel around and mark off where the Kfarim are to help out the Kohanim. On one such journey, he made a stop off at Hebron at Ma'aras HaMachpelah. Let's read the Gemara. It's a Gemara Maseches Baba Basra. Daf Menches Amud Aleph says the quote here, Rabbanah used to mark out caves where there were dead bodies. When he came to the cave of Avraham, Ma'aras HaMachpelah, he found Eliezer Eved Avraham standing at the entrance. So Avraham is a Tana. He's a Tana means he's from the greatest sages of his time. That's how he became a Tana. And this is the time of before, pre-Gemara. And Rabbanah experiences, he meets Eliezer Eved Avraham. By the way, didn't pass away. Eliezer Eved Avraham is standing and guarding the entrance of Ma'aras HaMachpelah, and Rabbanah meets him. Spiritual life, physical, however you learn it. And he says to him, Eliezer, what is Avraham doing right now? Eliezer answers, Avraham is sleeping and Sarah is gazing at his head. Says Bana, go and tell him Bana is standing at the entrance. Said Avraham to him, let him enter. And the whole continuation of the Gemara, he went in, surveyed the cave, came out again, the whole story. This part though, the beginning part of the story, the Tzemach Tzedek in Chassidus writes a fascinating insight into what seems to be a piece of a Gadata. Rabbanah comes, he asks Eliezer what's going on, says Eliezer, Avraham is sleeping and Sarah is gazing at his head. What is he getting at? Says Chassidus, gazing at his head, it borrows from other areas, but the Tzemach Tzedek writes in Torah that Sarah is doing her part of the partnership. You have Avraham, and Avraham stands for tremendous givingness, Isha Chesed, which is making available and pouring down Shefa, giving over to anyone and everyone goodness and kindness. And Sarah is looking at his head and scrutinizing, looking carefully. Says that Tzemach Tzedek is like she's weeding out any contamination, any lice or any dirt that might have got into his hair, onto his head, and she's scrutinizing it to remove the bad apple, so to speak, so that the hashpah, the givingness of Avraham, should be funneled and directed only to where it has to reach. Let's read it inside. Sarah would separate those hairs so that it would be as they were without any spiritual impurities getting mixed into them. This is to say that the converts who were receiving energy from Avraham as hairs emerging from the head, hairs from the head, converts that were emerging from Avraham's influence, should be pure of any dross or contamination. This was Sarah's part of the partnership. Indeed, we find that there have been converts who were great tzaddikim, like Rabbi Akiva, who's his father, his grandfather, uncle is the convert, Rabbi Meir, Shmaya, Talia, and Avadia, who was a prophet. Certainly all derived energy from Avraham Avinu. And this was because Sarah removed any impurities from the hair of Avraham Avinu, that they should be clean of all dross, and that the spiritual contaminant of lice should not be found in them. And this is what it means that Sarah is gazing, scrutinizing Avraham's head. She, in her part, is limiting the scope of Avraham's goodness, of Avraham's energy, so that it shouldn't go wayward, instead it should be focused. If this is what Sarah does, we can now go back and revisit the Parasha and find that actually every part of the Parasha is building up to us appreciating Sarah's gift to us. And we can see how even as Avram and Yitzchak move on in life, they have internalized Sarah's message, mission, and Sarah's input has become part of mainstream Yiddishkeit. Building of the future takes into account this such important lesson that it's not about getting through to everybody through diluting our message. Instead, keep it focused, even if we lose some of the crowd in the audience, but it'll be powerful and it'll have the potency to make a difference. Let's revisit those 3 stories and watch how in each one of those 3 stories, we find the Sarah element, the input of Sarah Imenu's greatness to be able to channel Avram's givingness into a redirect so that it should build up and it should grow, and that every single time Avram has an input, even if it's not to everybody, the message is loud and clear. So this is what the Parasha actually talks about. So remember, we have Chayei Sarah. The name of the Parasha teaches us that the stories we read in the Parasha aren't not Sarah. They're not moving on without Sarah. Instead, the stories emphasize that it's all about Sarah. Maybe not our lifetime, but our life mission. It's all about Sarah. And we're going to revisit the 3 stories of Avram burying Sarah, of Avram marrying off Yitzchak, and Yitzchak finding comfort. And the third level part where Avram takes another wife, Keturah, and has 6 more children. They all have a great message, and the examples actually of exactly this, Sarah's message. Let's do one story at a time. The first story is Parasha Machpelah. Fascinatingly, Avram Avinu, just picture it in your mind for a second. He just lost his wife, his dear wife, who was with him through thick and thin. Even before he left his hometown. And through each stage, as they went through all the different tests, Sarah Imenu was at his side. And now she's passed away. He's looking for a special place to bury her. Where does he find? What does he look for? He looks for the holiest place he can think of. The burial site of Adam and Chava. And he goes and tracks down Parasha Machpelah. And he finds the owner. And he says, I need this plot of land. His Sarah has to be buried in the top, in Adam and Chava's gravesite. And Ephraim says to him, sure, absolutely. We agree 100%. Bring Sarah and bury her here. It's all yours. Go right ahead. And Avram says, no. This is no longer going to be a universal gravesite. Adam and Chava, a father and mother of all of humanity. All of humanity. Every single human being that ever existed are the descendants and have claimed to being the descendants of Adam and Chava. Says Avram, no. That was until now. I'm buying this plot of land and I'm turning this universal site into a family affair. It's now going to be Sarah, and it's going to be a family Beis Olam. It's going to be a Parasha Machpelah where Avram himself will be buried, Yitzchak and Rivka, Yaakov and Leah. It's going to become a Yiddish site. We're changing, we're limiting, we're funneling, and we're narrowing down the message because Sarah Imenu's Chayei, the lifetime of Sarah, is how we're going to continue going forward. Amazing. Yes, it looks like he's finding closure. He's finding closure of Sarah's lifetime. But her life mission is how his new modus operandi is. This is how he behaves. This is how he chooses. This is how he makes his decisions. He's changing a universal thing, and he's narrowing down so that Yiddishkeit can flourish, and that will be the way when Yiddishkeit has a narrower message, is strong, it will be able to be a light into the nations and be able to make the difference. Story number 1 actually isn't leaving Sarah behind, it's bringing Sarah's mission into the forefront of how we behave. Amazing. Second story, Yitzchak is going to find another wife and find comfort over the loss of his mother. He's going to remain productive. He's going to keep on doing what he needs to do. But think about it. Where does his wife come from? Rivka's coming from miles away. It was an enormous journey, miracles and all, in order to bring Rivka here. Yet we know from the beginning, Rashi tells us the story, Eliezer says that he has his daughter. Bas Hoysel Eliezer. And Eliezer offers his daughter in marriage. You can imagine Eliezer was the kind of guy who Avram Avinu trusted with entire wealth. Avram Avinu trusted Eliezer with being an agent, not just a shadchan, make an introduction. Eliezer was able, and he did. He gave her the engagement ring. He obviously trusted Eliezer to be a righteous, upright individual. And yet, when Eliezer offers to Avram, why should we travel over there? I have a daughter. Avram says, yes, you have a daughter. And we respect and love the daughter, fantastic. But Yitzchak, we've learned from Chayei Sarah. No, very specific, very unique, particular, exclusive. And this is what will have to be done for Yitzchak. Everybody else is great, but it's not part of the focus that we need right here and now. This is Chayei Sarah. The entire story that we have of Yitzchak getting married is just more details and more details of living what Sarah Imenu teaches us and gifts us with. Amazing. This is what Avraham Avinu learns from Sarah, so to speak. Takes on board the ingredients, the gift Sarah gives to us, the necessity, the importance of being able to focus inwards and in a focused, filtered, funneled direction of energy. Second story as well. And the third story, just the same. Avram does take another wife and does have another 6 children. But look at what the Psukim actually say. Pasuk Hey, and Avram gave all that he possessed to Yitzchak and to the sons of Avram's concubines. Avram gave gifts and sent them away from his son Yitzchak. While Avram was still alive, eastward to the land of the east, it was clear. And Avram left no room for any doubt during his lifetime already. He says, inheritance? No. Only one. Gifts galore, no problem. Giving us kindness, we respect, we love you. Avram would have loved his children. Mr. Kindness himself. But he sends them away with gifts. Zergei gesund. What we have as a mission, absolutely focused. Look, Dr. Rashi, Avram gave all that he possessed to Yitzchak. He withdrew his inheritance from all his other children for what Sarah's wish when she said, so that was Sarah's wish when he said, He lo Yiddish ben Ha'amah v'goyim, for the son of the maiden will not inherit with my son with Yitzchak. Furthermore, the Abish of the Holy One Blessed, he agreed with her and said, Kol shetem alach shma v'koila ki v'yitzchak yikar l'chazara. Whatever Sarah tells you, hearken to her voice, because in Yitzchak will be called your seed. This was Sarah's gift. Amazing. This is what we're learning here. During Sarah's physical life, her input was in the background. And after she passed on, and we see in this week's Parasha, from the first story of Avram changing a universal Ma'aras Machpelah into a specific Yiddishkeit Machpelah, cave, a Ma'ara is going to be a family affair. And then you have the second story of marrying of Yitzchak and Avram, even though Sarah's not here with him physically, is living with the input of Sarah and not taking anyone or everyone for Yitzchak, but only very specific. And of course, the third story where he sends all the other gifts, all the other children with gifts and keeps the inheritance on the straight and narrow focused path. This is Chayei Sarah, the lifetime of Sarah, and the lifetime which is a life mission of Sarah. The central point for the Parasha of Chayei Sarah's name is frame is after her passing, were achieved by Sarah through her work of 120 years of life in this world. However, as she actually went about her work, its impact remained concealed, only becoming revealed after her passing. Now, in so much as the ultimate purpose of one's life work is for the effects of the work to be eventually be revealed, therefore it's understood that those aspects of the Parasha in which Chayei Sarah's work becomes revealed, as Chayei Sarah, the life of Sarah, they are the completed purpose of all the 127 years of the life of Sarah. And this is what we have to remember. Sometimes not everybody agrees with what we're doing. Some people either goes over their head, they don't agree, they think we should do it otherwise. Those who need to know. Those who need to be impacted stand out and will be impacted. Social norms, that's not how we measure. It's not worth diluting the truth to gain momentum. We gain momentum with the quality, with the focus. And when we can do that, Be'ez Hashem, we'll see all the good nachas, the atzlacha, that we need, and Hashem should bench every single one of us. It should be a meaningful Chav Cheshvan, celebration of Teim Chetmimim, celebration of the Rebbe Shabbos, Mesiras Nefesh, and Esmesus to Chasidus, and of course, a Mevarchim Diga week of a Shabbos, Mevarchim Chodesh Kislev, and of course, all the old good brachas. The main thing is we should remind ourselves, even if we feel like we're not popular, you are a treasure. You are a treasure. That's what Hashem thinks. And when we can stick to what needs to be done and what's done right, that's exactly how we will continue to find much continued tzachah, and we should see it b'toiv and nigla in good health and in good wealth, prosperity, and joy.
Amen.
Thank you very much, everybody, for joining. Next week is This Holy Land is Your Land, and a very special Yasher Koyach to Michal and Le'akov for sponsoring the material. Good vach, everybody, and a good Chodesh.